Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Ben talks about a planting date trial conducted by ISU Southeast Research Farm, as well as a wheat intercrop double crop soybean study that the research farm conducted. Lynn and Dylan attended FarmCon in Kansas City, Missouri this week. Hear what they learned, what's going on now, and what's coming down the pipeline in the ag industry.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben, Lynn, and Dylan. And we're going to start off with Ben, but I just want to give you a little preview. Lynn and Dylan just came back from FarmCon. It's a big meeting in Kansas City put on by the Van Trump family, some of the best speakers in the United States that are going to talk about agriculture. And after Ben has a little discussion here, they're going to take it away and bring back the key points that they found from FarmCon in Kansas City, Missouri. Go ahead, Ben.
I got some data back from, we sponsor some research trials up at the Southeast Iowa Research Center in Crawfordsville, Iowa.
By Iowa State, right?
Yep, these are Iowa State conducted trials, and because we sponsor some of the stuff, they run some trials for us. We had, they did a planting date study with 2 Mershman products, and had 2 different planting time frames. They had April 13th planted versus May 11th planted, and you can see those bar graphs, Lynn. What do you think the yield difference was?
Unless you have your scale there scaled really, really low, it looks pretty significant.
Yeah. So the 3.2 planted on April 13th was 89.9. That same bean planted May 11th was 83.4. So you're looking at a 6 bushel yield advantage by just your planting date.
And that is a, yield monitor, statistically significant number there.
Yep.
Ben, 83 ain't too bad, though.
83 isn't bad at all, but it's something that we can be focusing on if the conditions are right when we're planting in that early season, because it's free money. It doesn't cost any more diesel. It doesn't cost another pass across the field. It's just getting those soybeans out there.
One thing to remember, though, that was Starting Line Plus, Mershman Seeds Starting Line Plus on it. Yep. So in other words, it was our best seed treatment. We are protecting against sudden death and some of the other nematodes, and with the Trinemco, and it was the best that we can do. So don't try this with untreated seed.
That is correct. So 6.5 bushel difference on the McKinleys that were planted in Crawfordsville, and about 5.8 bushel difference on the Mohawks that were planted the same time frame, same difference. So statistical difference there. We kind of knew that, but that kind of lines up with what Chris Ehler has talked about. That lines up with some of our other studies that we've looked at, and also just the trend lines that we've seen over the past couple of years,
And those are in-zone beans too. I mean, it's not like we've tried to manipulate the data by throwing a super long season bean out there, or you know what I mean?
Right.
Those are beans that are very common to that area. And I guess a little bit of background, that astounds me, period, what that yield was. Because we went up there for a power core training to look at some products. And yeah.
A little dry?
You could almost lose a pickup in some of the cracks in the ground, and this is not too far from where Turk lives. And he would come in, we'd catch tenths or ½ inch, and he'd just be like, "Nothing. I didn't get a thing." So
deep soils, though. Deep soils.
Yeah, God did bless those guys up there.
So for their growing season, starting measuring in March, they had 6.5 inches of rain up until their first decent rain period that hit in August. So yeah, it was pretty dry.
Yeah.
They finished the year off, the growing season off 11 inches shy of where they normally have their 35-year average, which leads into the next conversation. Iowa State's doing a little bit more work with double crop, intercrop, and soybeans planted by themselves. The University of Illinois had some nice data on this last year. Iowa State's starting to look into this, and this is a continuing project that will roll through for next year. We'll have data like this for next year.
Basically, trying to introduce wheat into the rotation and make it profitable.
Correct. So I can put this data up on the screen so you guys can look at it as well. But I used a wheat price of $6, which is close to what we can sell wheat for as it comes out of the field in July, with the 40-cent basis taken off of it. And I used a $11.88 November contract for 24. What we can see when we look at this data is that the wheat yielded fairly well. We had our Binti double crop our ultra early Binti out there, it rolled in at 86 and 86. So there was no yield difference on the wheat when it was either double cropped, so it didn't have soybeans planted in it, or intercropped when they did have soybeans planted in it in that April 13th time frame. The wheat yield didn't change when in their study from intercrop to leaving that crop out by itself.
So they actually plant soybeans in April into that wheat?
That is correct. Yep. And when they look at that data, the wheat yield didn't change. The first crop soybeans versus the intercrop versus the double crop changed a lot, and it had to do with that moisture profile, what we were looking at. The double crop on the milli versus the Binti, the soybeans ranged from the pure double crop. So they were planted on the 7th of July. It was 21 bushel per acre and 23 bushel per acre on the same soybeans. They didn't have the soil moisture profile built in. They were already dry. The wheat had taken a lot of that moisture out.
Just getting them out of the ground was a tough job.
Correct.
Yep. And the intercropped were actually 30 bushel per acre. So getting them planted a little bit earlier, that they had the root zone established underneath them so that they could get to some water. Obviously they were hurt because the wheat had robbed a lot of that water to make the high yield that it did. But there's some advantages and disadvantages in what that looks like. So
yeah. And just a little footnote, with intercrop, when you plant that early, if you get a wet year, you're going to have the beans outgrow the wheat, and sometimes. So you got to. There's a little bit of a balance that goes on there when you're intercropping. With a dry year like this, was no problem. They weren't really focused on growth. But when you get a wet year, you can have the beans right next to the head. It makes it a little tough to combine because you're actually going to chop off the top of the beans a little bit. I've seen that. So you got to figure that all out.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. So there's
what's a V4, where it's still in that what I'll call the alfalfa stage, where we can bend it over and not break the stem and have issues with.
I think it's if I had to roll beans in what you're talking about, that alfalfa stage, I think it's somewhere between V1 and V2.
I got you.
Because if you're before V1 and you're in that close to that like crook stage, you can snap the hypocotyl or the cotyledons off, and when it's after that, you got a little bit too much height, and you can actually break them off at the ground.
Yeah, and that's a little bit difference here when you look at some of these plants too. When you compare it in an intercrop, you get a really long distance between that first node and the ground, and that's energy the plant is using just to try to compete with that wheat. So back to, it worked out this time, but if we get the inverse where we're dry late, there's a lot of real estate that's just plant, right, where we count on 2 to 3 nodes in a potentially in a double crop situation to hang on to. So risk reward on both of that.
Absolutely. So when you look at just pure dollars and cents, and not even including I just got this late last night and put some numbers together. When you look at where we're at, the first crop planted soybeans made 74 bushel per acre compared to 21, 23, and the 30 bushel per acre intercrop. When you look at what that yield did, the soybean first crop by itself is the most profitable. And doing rough math and figuring costs, if the beans would have made 35, 36, 37, which I know double crop beans around here can make, especially on clay-based soil or a little bit more productive soil that's not necessarily sand where they starve out so fast, the math starts to make a lot more sense. So you need to be in that 35 to 40 bushel double crop before that inverse happens. So I thought that was some interesting information. We'll probably have this put up on the website in the yield information, the Mershman Advantage, once Alex has the ability to make it look pretty,
sure,
so it's not just numbers.
July 7th, that's late, you know what I'm saying, for planting soybeans. And that's why we're working on these, what we call hyper early. And the hyper early, we've got to get that date closer to planting those soybeans by the June 25th.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden in the north, this all makes sense.
Correct.
And down south, they got plenty of time. I mean, it's normal. I mean, but we're hoping these hyper earlies that we're just starting to increase right now will come off when, Ben? When do you hope they come off? In our region, our local region right here?
June 15th.
June 15th. So that changes the ball game. And then your double crop, then all of a sudden you're going to be looking at 50 bushel.
Right.
And then if we can maintain the yield in the 80s, then all of a sudden you've got yourself some good cash flow.
Yeah, and then not to mentioned just changing up that dynamic in the biome there with introducing wheat as another crop into that rotation, and just given that that soil health benefit, I guess, that are we able to quantify that yet? Potentially, if you look at different tests, but just talking to folks down in Missouri about beans on beans on beans, and they're really satisfied with 45 bushel beans. This is an opportunity to break that cycle and to give that soil maybe a little bit of a break from the soybeans, break from the pests. It's just a really good opportunity that we're not even taking into account from a financial standpoint, that we'll probably eventually reap the rewards to that. But right now it makes sense from day one. So it's a good opportunity for guys that are looking at that diversification from both a soil health standpoint and then an income standpoint as well.
And the other thing too is with hyper early, you can take the straw off and still plant the beans and get some more revenue off that straw. And that's another thing to look at. And then if you really want to get serious about double crop, is you cut that wheat at 18% moisture and throw it in a bin and throw air on it. You'll pick up even more days. So then all of a sudden you're planting in the first half of June, and the whole thing changes even more. So I really like, if you're really serious about double cropping, is that you take the wheat off 18%, throw it in a bin and dry it with air, and then get your soybeans planted, and then you're not waiting for those humid days to drop off enough that you can get the wheat to dry down. That's just my opinion.
And we have technology now that you can put on bins that can help automate that, where if you're nervous about missing that mark, it can provide either an algorithm that will provide that dry down for you, or will at least give you some guidance and some tools to look at that you can make a really informed decision, not just turn it on and hope for the best in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Normally ran it during the day and you shut it off at night, because you'll reverse what you gained during the day in the night when the humidity comes up.
So basically, closing thoughts. I look forward to seeing the testing done next year. It didn't work out the way we wanted it to this year, but I think this is an anomaly year when I look back at the 20 years of rainfall that Crawfordsville has had. This was a horrible year for trying to get something established that late. So, we'll try it again next year and see what the actual replicated data tells us. And if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to me if they have any questions on what this trial looked like. So, how's FarmCon?
Well, I will just add the note here that one of the experts on the panel when we first got there, Mike Mock, had a comment that he is actually very excited about wheat. So this kind of ties into the conversation here that wheat looks to be one of the very few bright spots from a market standpoint that they were looking at, and it's all relative to the kind of the goings on of the world. India has had some issues with exports when it comes to wheat. They're in the midst of an election, and what they want is a good food supply. So rice and wheat exports weren't happening, and we are now looked at. I thought it was very interesting too that we're actually one of the cheapest rice exports in the world. We, for the first time, had exported rice to West Africa. So the American farmer has a lot of opportunities for some diversification. Obviously, up here, rice is probably not something that we're going to dabble with, but in those areas that have that ability to add that to their portfolio, it definitely looks like there is something or some crop that can be very profitable for them.
Yeah, they plant rice 300 miles straight south of us in the Boot Hill. So
another interesting one. And first, I guess I should go back, and I want to thank the Van Trump family for putting this on. It is it's an event that is a really good mixture of high level knowledge and information. You're talking some of the brightest minds in the technology sphere, marketing, leadership, and then also a good mix of bringing people together from different aspects and having a good marketing or networking, ability to meet different folks and kind of pick their brains on what their operations and what they have done to make themselves successful, and whether that's a farmer, a business, or an advisor. It's just a really good networking opportunity to meet some folks that have done stuff maybe different than what you've done, and kind of challenge every person to kind of step outside their comfort zone a little bit, no matter what that comfort zone is. So appreciate them having us out and putting on the conference. The one thing, I think Kevin came out swinging when he was talking about cost of capital. We talk about the 80s and the farm crisis, and right now people are talking, well, the 80s we had the interest rate large swing compared to what we are today. But what he compared it to was, when we look at the operating line of credits for operations today, it's substantially larger than what it was back in the 80s. So our cost of capital really isn't that much different when we look at what the cost of capital was on, a $160,000 operating line that you had to run your whole year. Well, now we're $2 million to run the farm essentially. So we don't necessarily have the issue with the interest rate, but what we have is we have a pile of debt out there that is subjected to interest rate change. So kind of a scary thought, and it's not just farm. I mean, businesses are in that same boat. It transcends continents. David Farley was talking about they're having the same problem in Australia. They're going to have a great reckoning, I guess, for lack of better words. That's not the term that he used, but I can't use that on Cup of Joe. We're in the midst of a potential, I wouldn't call it a reset, but there's going to be some good hard looks at the bottom line and how the cost of capital for running your business, running your farm, running your life, what that looks like, because we're going to have a change. Another one that stood out, when one person talks about something and it kind of seems a little bit controversial, you're kind of, yeah. When 3 or 4 people talk about it, you start to go, uh-oh, like this might be a real thing. What stood out to me, 3 or 4 talks about some of the effects going on in China with their economy, and how does that relate to the American farmer and agriculture and what we have to deal with. They're in the midst of a potential disaster, I guess, for lack of better terms, in their economy. Their population's going down. The scary part with China is that nobody knows how much money China truly has lent out all over the world. And if they get into a bind and need to, have cash, all that money either gets called or the interest rate changes. That could have a very significant impact on the world economy. Their imports, from a dairy standpoint, New Zealand is a big importer to China. From a dairy standpoint, was down 31%. So they're in trouble, and it's an elephant in the room that we have to be cognizant of. Obviously, they still have a big appetite for our soybeans. We haven't quite got to the point yet domestically with the renewable diesel, biodiesel, to take that. I mean, we still need China to take some beans from us, and right now they're still doing that. But we got to keep an eye on what their economy does. And, there's a housing crisis, potentially to a level above and beyond what we had here in the United States back in 2008. So China is one that we definitely should be paying attention, just
because they're one of our best customers, right?
Correct.
And I understand exactly what they're saying. And some of this was predicted, their one-child policy and the fact that 2070, 80, 90, somewhere in there, their population could be half what it is today.
Yep.
Because they're not going to have the workers. They have to have an 8% growth in their economy every year, which is much higher than ours, just to maintain their system. So I totally agree. And then our politicians are trying to sell us on the idea that China is going to be our biggest threat. And I didn't read that when the president of China came over and talked to Biden. It seemed like to me that he said, hey, just mutual respect is what we need between our two countries, and we can get along because we kind of need each other a little bit.
For sure. And the last one that I'll hit on before I turn it over to Dylan is from a farm perspective, and then from a world perspective, is we just need to keep an eye on this technology advancement. We're going to get to the point potentially by, 2100, if I remember right, that we could have more electronic devices than atoms in the world of living mechanisms. That there's some advancements that are come out that potentially our food we'll have something in it that will dictate to us that, hey, you just had 30 grams of protein, and then boom, it pops up on your phone, and you're going to track your calories through all that.
Better stop drinking that beer.
Yep. So that one, it's kind of a wild thought, but when you look at the 1960s, when computers and processors were first coming out, he showed a picture of the first basically USB stick that was considered movable. They moved it with an airplane, and now you buy them 4-pack over at Dollar General for $3.
Oh, I can tell you, this office was built in 1985, and we had an IBM System 36, and we needed to increase the storage capacity half a gig, which what do these memory sticks have them? They have like
20, 30 gigs.
Yeah, it cost $10,000 back then for a half a gig to put another disk in our computer. $10,000, which for us was, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But we got to have it, and so storage capacities really got cheap. And we had a futurist probably 8 years ago, maybe 10, and he said that in the future you'll be spending 50% of your living wake time in a virtual world. And a virtual world would be your phone or computer or whatever. And all the stuff you just said, this aligns perfectly with that and that's why we're losing the art of conversation, aren't we?
Yeah. The last one I guess was interesting that I took out of it, that in 10 years we will have our own personal chat GPT or basically like a virtual assistant. And what their prediction is that in 5 years, the entry-level jobs in Wall Street, your basic accountants and your entry-level positions will be no more. That'll all be handled by AI. Now, the one caveat to that is that they did mention in a talk later on that the entry-level positions are at risk, but they still need people to make sure that the machines are doing what they're doing to interpret the data, that mid-level or upper level, that those jobs are still safe. It's basically your intern type jobs that are at risk. But the efficiency comes at a cost, and that cost is that we are going to lose those entry-level jobs. I mean, McDonald's were in that same thing, that if you got to pay someone $17 an hour, McDonald's says, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to put a kiosk in, and you're just going to
punch your order in. Yep, punch it in.
So technology, we think that we're sitting in a position right now that technology just blows our minds. We have, everything that we can have, but the forefront with AI and some of the advances that we're having in those realms, we probably even haven't scratched the surface of the.
I always said that in the future it'd be 2 95-year-old farmers at wherever they hang out when you're in the future. A convenience store would be, if they stopped in, they get their phones out and they'll go, hey Ben, how many acres you plant last night? And you would have said, well, I planted 450. Oh, beat you, I planted 500. And that's with remote control tractors and all the different technology that basically everything, it's not going to take as much labor.
And the wild part is, and I see it, and they talked about it and brought it to the forefront that, some of this technology is here. It's right now. We just don't really utilize it to the extent that we could do it. But there's technology there that, John Deere with their autonomous tractors, and there's just a little bit of what will innovation, the end user demand for it, and then my last one would be what government either overreach or regulation kind of stymies that enhancement. So
expect change and be ready for it.
Exactly.
Dylan, what's your insights from the FarmCon?
No one likes to look at red markets every day you look at it. It's not fun. But one of the panels, they kind of hit on that they're hoping, or they are expecting stability in the markets coming in 24. So we just get something kind of stable. Seems like everything's jumping around. We don't know what the heck stuff is going to cost or the markets are going to do. So along with inputs are going to kind of even out here, which I think would be good for everyone. So we kind of gauge what we're doing and what we need to do. But then another one is we have a pretty big farm report coming out next Friday. That's really going to kind of tell us what to expect kind of come spring. We already have a lot of supply out there that's right now as we speak. So they're kind of expecting, if we have a good dry spring, that 91 million acres that they're predicting for corn could go up even more. So we need to kind of put that in our mind that corn we already have a lot of it, and if guys are going to plant even more, be careful, watch out.
Farmers have already voted on corn because this fall was so ideal. Fertilizer's been put on. We talked about that last week a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and the ground's ready, and we're on the dry side. We're looking at an early spring, so that's why really imploring our dealers and our customers, get your seed on the farm, because believe it or not, in our area where we service, corn planting can start the last week of February south of Kansas City, and so you've got to be ready. And I would agree that farmers like to plant corn.
Yeah, and that was one of the big topics that they kind of talked about, is that's what guys like to plant. If they have the good weather, that's what they're going to choose, is they like it better than, say, planting soybeans. So they kind of on the soybean side, they say 60% of soybeans are sold already, like out of like come harvest. So we need to, maybe in the future, they talk about maybe keeping storage available, taking advantage of that storage that you have on the farm to maybe gain those cents that other guys can't take advantage of.
So you're saying between harvest and right now, 60% of what we raised last summer is been marketed?
Yes. Yep. And then they're kind of expecting that number to go down a little bit, from what I kind of understood. So we need to maybe take that and run with it too. That if we have that storage, take advantage of it.
So that's what Turk said. February.
Yep.
When you look at it, it kind of makes sense as we shift to this our soybean demand to putting on a boat and sending it south. If we have to keep it for these oil productions, that if they're not going to hold on or have the ability to store what they need to crush, and then also they'll turn into the fuel side of it, that there could be some opportunities to have some pretty good basis, or a cash price that's pretty attractive come March, April, May, June, when they run out of their fill and they need more to come in. So, but that's back again. If you have the opportunity to be around those plants, that's something to look at. But if you don't, beans are just hard to store, and that's part of the reason why guys don't do that. They're just a little bit more finicky than corn as far as babysitting, I guess, for lack of better terms.
Yeah, and we check our bins constantly, and right now there's some problems showing up with stored grain. So if you're not paying attention to your stored grain, this is something Turk would be saying if he was here, and you better be doing the sniff test on your bins right now, because as we get colder, the temperature inside the bin and the temperature outside, there's a big spread, and that's when that moisture migrates. And you want to do the sniff test and make sure your bins are level, and otherwise what you think you have may not be there in the spring.
Yeah, and I think part of that's back to, I look at our operation and some others, where do you put your bins or your beans, and probably those old government bins, no fan, you're kind of just subjected to whatever nature has and what you put it in at. So it's very important and very from both a money standpoint and a safety standpoint, because moldy beans are very, very, very bad. Mm-hmm. So it's very important as we look at that to transition that, don't be afraid to invest a little bit of money into the bins like they're talking about, but make sure you're also setting them right to move some air around and be able to keep your beans in condition.
Anything else, Dylan, that struck you at FarmCon?
I think I'll just stick to just be ready, take advantage of anything that you can, because it could turn in a hurry with the supply being up and demand down.
And early planting will automatically trigger over-optimism for a big crop. It always does. As soon as we get started planting, we're going to raise a big crop. And of course, it's a far cry from planting to harvest, but it generally, when we do plant early, we generally do have good crops. I mean, as a general rule. 6.5 bushel.
6.5 bushel.
Yeah, that's just
full circle.
Yeah, we're our worst enemy, and we encourage high yields, and then we get low prices because of it, right? But yeah, I remember what Chad Hart, and next Thursday is our crop fair with Iowa State University at Burlington, Iowa. And I remember what Chad Hart said a year ago. He said, we are in a set of markets right now without some drought or some major thing that we're just going to slowly move back to normal, and normal is break even, and we hate normal. That's for sure, because it's really hard on everybody. So anyhow, I think marketing is the hardest part of farming. I think that's the hardest part, and I wish I could tell you, like Turk did last week, on what day to sell your grain, and that would be true. And remember, our advice is free, so keep that in mind.
That's also our liability.
Yeah.
But anyhow, it's
Subject to any black swan events, though, right?
Yeah, and the folks in Iowa know who Dr. Elwyn Taylor is or was. I mean, he was a great weather farm economist. And he's been looking at these 800-year tree cycles, and he said around 2025 we're supposed to have this, what he calls Dust Bowl drought, and that is plus or minus a year, he always said. So we got that in the back of our minds too. But Chad Hart said we might have had it here the last year or last 2 years ago, because I know some folks had it. I mean, they really had the Dust Bowl drought, particularly west of us. So I'll tell you what, this farming thing, that's what gets you up in the morning every day, is to try to figure out all these variables. But FarmCon's a great place to go to stretch your mind, get some new ideas, keep an idea on what the trends are coming, and be ready for them and not surprised. And that's kind of where we're in right now, is what we call the meetings circuit right now. And it'll be going on this month and next month, and getting ready for spring, and then all of a sudden we got a plant. So.
You should learn something new every day.
That's right.
We have this conversation every day. Yeah. What'd you learn today? So it's good to keep that. Your brain is a muscle, and keep it active. But
anyhow, if we don't have anything else, on my Cup of Joe story, I'm going to go back to one my dad told me years ago. It's a story. A story about this guy that worked at this big factory. You know, if you've ever been to a big factory, they always have security. You have to go through security to get in, get out. They're making sure nobody's taking anything or whatever. Well, this one worker every day had a wheelbarrow, and he'd come out, and it was just filled full of packaging material. That stuffing, you get in packaging material. And at the guardhouse, the guard would meticulously go through all that stuffing, never find anything. So, okay, go ahead. Well, day after day after day, he kept coming out with a wheelbarrow full of this packing stuffing, and every day the guard guy would look through it, could not find anything. Finally, one day, the guard says to the employee, I know you're stealing something. I can't find it. I won't turn you in, and there will be no repercussions, but please tell me, you're driving me nuts. What are you stealing? And the guy said, wheelbarrows. So some things are so obvious that you don't really see them, and that's kind of the way life is. So be on the lookout. Anyhow, thanks for watching today, and thank you for your business. It's time to order your seed. Like I say, the only reason why you don't order your seed right now is because you want to pay more, because we have the lowest prices of the year right now, this week and next, with our cash discounts, and we'd appreciate an opportunity to talk to you about Mershman seeds. So I hope your family is healthy and safe. We'll see you next week.